Welcome to spoiler talk for the Raw Shark Text. I'm predicting quite possibly the longest spoiler talk in the history of spoiler talks here.
It's going to be so good. Yeah.
I would like to start by saying, because I have less notes, I have some questions. They're just all in my head. I would like to say that I've read a lot of horror, and not as much as some listeners and some Patreon contributors maybe, but I have read a substantial amount of horror in my life. And I don't know of anything that made me as uneasy as reading the Mr. Nobody scene from this book.
Oh, tell me about it. So, like,
on my third read through, and I was still substantially creeped out and uneasy reading it. So I know exactly what's going to happen. And still it had the same effect on me.
I agree. And so I think that part of that for me comes from there's so much uncertainty built into that scene where it's like, first of all, you don't know who this person is. And, it's pretty obvious early on that he's not on your side, but you don't know why. And then when things start to get weird, it's thrown into question, like, the agency of Mr. Nobody. Like, is he a real person? Is he controlled by someone? Why is he just, like, suddenly acting so strange? And it just gets so out of control and just in such a confusing and unnerving way that, like, you're already, at that point in the book, he thought he understood how weird things could get. And then, like, this Mr. Nobody thing just comes out of nowhere and just kind of introduces this ridiculously other level of fucked upness, including the fact that there was that, like, luxophage, right? That was introduced.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, like, even before he even meets Mr. Nobody's kind of, like, invading his life. And it's kind of almost like a privacy thing. It's just, it was creepy as hell.
Well, and you have a villain that's so unbalanced, like him continuing to ask what time it was. Yeah. And the part I think that maybe creeped me out the most is where he's telling Eric that he is him.
Yeah.
But then denies saying it.
Yeah.
Like, there's like a level of crazy. Like, if you ever deal with someone who's very schizophrenic, like, that's the kind of thing. Like, I said something, but then 2 minutes later, I'm denying that I said it.
Before you move from that point, can I share with you, like, the single most terrifying moment of my entire life, and I'm being 100% honest right now?
Yes, I'd love to hear this.
This is totally true. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, and I most people probably haven't, and I will not reveal any information about this person, obviously, because this is very personal. But in my travels through life, I became decently close friends with someone who actually has multiple personalities. Have you ever experienced that at all, personally?
I have not, no.
Very rare. Like, so dissociative personality disorder is a very rare thing, and it usually happens when, like, someone has a traumatic experience in their life and their mind creates a personality that's strong enough to overcome that situation. Mm-hmm. So, like, that's kind of the idea. So the person that I knew had probably 3 personalities that I was aware of when they finally felt comfortable enough kind of explaining that to me. I've never been more disturbed in my entire life than watching someone switch from one personality to another. Like, it is the most fucking disturbing thing you'll ever see, because, like, they're talking like one person. There's a moment of complete silence, and then, like, boom, it is literally a different person, but occupying the same body. It's insanity. I don't even know how I can describe, like, but I was just watching this, like, just not even knowing how to respond to it.
That has to be unnerving. And like most things, we see that, I don't want to say a lot, but that's prevalent in movies and whatever. But there's that screen between you and that situation. It's like saying that, like, seeing a werewolf doesn't scare me because it's on the screen, but then seeing one in real life is a whole different fucking story.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always reminded, and I don't know why I think about this. Maybe it's become a phobia, but last year or 2 years ago, maybe there was video of. First of all, I don't know who all these people are that have cameras where they're recording the roadway in front of them, because you see so many of these videos now. But it's that plane that, like, the wing actually, like, clips part of, like, the expressway or whatever it's on. That plane is, like, right in front of you.
Yep.
And that video was so disturbing to me. It's in my mind, like, frequently enough, and it's because it's real. So, how many times have we seen that type of shit in a movie and you don't even think about it? But, I could imagine that actually seeing someone's personality change has to be very unnerving and disquieting and whatever other words you want to throw at it, but it really jarring.
Right. And that's the quality of this scene that we were talking about, is that, like, it in the moment, and you weren't expecting it, and there's no way to prepare for it, something happens that makes you realize that reality is something entirely different than what you can handle.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way to put it.
Yeah.
I want to address. I get the feeling that a lot of this. I mean, certainly you're going to have a chance, but it's going to be a lot, kind of like you said, me just asking questions or whatever.
Yeah.
I think I know what your response to this is going to be, but I have a concern that there is a plot hole.
I can't wait for this plot hole.
All right, so Eric Sanderson is on a quest to. So the first Eric Sanderson, we find out at the end, wanted to erase his memories because he couldn't deal with the loss of Cleo.
I'd like to clarify that.
Okay.
So,
good. Then that's not where I was going, but that's okay. Let's start there.
So his idea, and like, so he discovered the Ludovichian, and the idea of the shark was that it eats your memories and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But in reading, like, lore and history and, like, I guess, like, folklore about the creature, there was one kind of shamanistic belief that meant that made people believe that when the shark ate your memories, that they were kind of preserved forever in some sort of spiritual afterlife within the shark. And so my understanding of what he was trying to do was he wanted the shark to take his memories of Cleo so that they would never die, so that she could live on inside the shark, because he was worried that if he continued on into old age, that his memories would eventually fade and he would lose her.
That's fair, and that makes perfect sense in the scheme of things of the book. I will tell you that I do remember the first time reading the book that my thought was, before you find out, so, the book is structured that Cleo's dead, but then you're really led to believe that maybe she isn't dead, and at least I thought, and like I said, I traveled down this path 3 times, and all 3 times I was convinced, even though I knew the answer, so to speak, that we were going in the same direction. I thought that maybe Cleo was victim of the shark, and that he was going to be reunited with her, sort of spiritually, by getting. And we know that's not because we find out that Cleo was killed by cancer, right? So your explanation for that makes sense. I still think that there might be. I have a question of the plot hole, though.
Hit me.
So he wants to do that. Why would he send information back to his second self to have him go down the same path?
I think that he had some. All right, so I don't have a good explanation for that, but I think he had some sort of, like, idea that the shark could be controlled in a way. Like, it was more like a hard drive than like a murderous beast. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, that, yep. Because then what I thought your response was going to be, and this ultimately would get into, like, some real serious prognosticating on the first Eric Sanderson, who we almost have to agree is not the first Eric Sanderson.
But some iteration along the way, yeah.
Right. But how do I say this? That maybe in the end, he winds up with Scout, who kind of becomes Cleo, however you want to explain that, by defeating the shark. But then there would have to be that foresight that could happen, if that makes sense. And that would really even escape the realm of a book that's this crazy, for him to say, okay, I can get my memories erased, but I can talk somebody else into being in this situation where the me that iteration is winds up being happy.
I'm going to disagree with that. And I know this is, I was even a little
well,
confused
no, and I was
by
saying
that.
that's a little bit far out there. I'm not saying that's what happened, but I
Right.
thought that might be kind of your take on it.
So I'll tell you my take on the story. So my take on the book in general is Eric loses Cleo. And actually she drowns while she's scuba diving. So she had cancer in her brain.
Oh, yes, you're right.
But her actual death is like a diving accident. He loses her, can't bear the thought of being without her, and wants to preserve her memory, and chooses the Ludovic as the way to like actually take the memory and preserve it somewhere. It goes horribly wrong, and he's basically desperate to survive the attacks by this shark. So he goes on this quest to figure out a way to stop the shark. Serendipitously meets Scout, who is being pursued by like an equally monstrous character, whereby like if the two of those like ridiculously monstrous beings were ever introduced, they would kind of cancel each other out, and therefore everybody would be safe. Like that's kind of the story. That's kind of the story in a nutshell, right?
Yes.
However, when they kill the shark and Mycroft Ward, which I can't wait to talk about Mycroft Ward. What happens is, especially so like, I have to back up a little bit. So in order to finally do this final showdown with the shark, they create like a conceptual boat and use this boat to kind of draw the shark out so that they can surprise it by introducing it to Mycroft Ward, which will, destroy it. Which is inevitably successful. But in this whole part of the story, there's the idea of like, he keeps thinking over and over again, this thought of like the reflection becomes the view. And the idea is like, because it's a very water-based metaphor, like when you look in the water, you see another kind of version of yourself. And at the point where the conceptual boat becomes a real boat, he becomes the water reflection of himself instead of his actual Eric Sanderson self. And at that point, they still kill the shark and save the day, but it's that switch where Scout actually becomes Cleo, because it's this like reflection world of like all the stuff that he kind of wanted life to be like. So Scout is, for all intents and purposes, Cleo in his life, and they go on to some sort of happy ending.
Okay, let's talk about him being dead. Where are you under the impression that they find his body?
That's real. Like the news clipping that said that found it.
But where is the place? Is he found in Fedoris's basement or whatever in this grand palace? Okay, because I was also thinking this time through, because that you go through the fragment of where he finds the photos and he takes them to some weird construction site.
Yeah, he finds the Cleo has the camera that the waterproof
photos,
camera,
right? Mm-hmm.
Yep, and gets the photos developed, and then he's so upset by them that he destroys them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. See, I almost think he committed suicide there.
And that everything that happens is...
And you think about it, now the whole thing is she does get the postcard from the therapist gets the postcard.
Dr. Randall gets the postcard addressed from Eric Sanderson that says like, "Don't come and find me" or whatever. Right.
And the line from Casablanca or whatever.
Here's looking at you, kid. Yep.
So that's the proof that that's a conversation only the two of them knew about, where she had asked if he remembers that movie, but he doesn't remember anything else. That basically all his personal stuff's wiped out. So, I think that was left, and that's why I say ambiguous, because some of this could lead you to believe, when you have the thing about him throwing out the things, and again, I will go back because I've got nothing to read this week. I mean, I've got stuff I want to read, but I don't have anything pressing for the podcast. In the Deansgate area of Greater Manchester last night, the body recovered from foundation works in the Deansgate area. Mm-hmm, now, if we go back a little bit to the fragment... Yeah, all right. I was just trying to find it because I almost think that he fucking killed himself. Like, And then everything after. But again, then he's still got, I don't know, man. I don't know. It's a fucked up book.
Is it all you got?
That's all I've got. But you get what I'm saying, right? I mean, we have to explain the fact that he's dead, and I'm trying to explain that based on the fact that, maybe it is the light bulb fragment.
Part 3.
It's all Cleo stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
My favorite lines in here is where he talks about a gasp of seawater.
Yep.
He says it's like dying from being 5 minutes late.
Yeah, that's fucking good.
Yeah. All right, because he says, yesterday morning when the spider's webs, I drove into town to a building site where they're putting up a leisure center or a cinema, and I took the fish pictures. I guess foundation works doesn't necessarily lend itself to that place, but it's also not real specific. Yeah, you know what I mean?
Right.
To Fedoris's, it's almost like he could be dead in either. Although if he killed himself there, I know he goes home from there, because he's writing about it in yesterday time. But it's almost like he went back there where he got rid of the fish photos.
So, like, I guess my question is, like, if he killed himself, how is there a story that's being told? How is there ever a second Eric Sanderson?
Right. But, yeah, so the postcard negates that.
But, yeah. Wait, so negates my question or negates your theory?
No, he killed himself at the beginning.
Right.
But he does end up dead somewhere from causes unknown.
Right.
Right, because he defeats the shark.
Yeah. And so, like, and that's where it gets weird because, like, all right, so he in the aftermath of him defeating the shark, he thinks he's the only one that survived aside from Ian the cat. And so he's kind of floating on wreckage of the boat. And for some reason, in that moment, he feels something in his pocket. He reaches in there, and he pulls out the postcard that he had, which was a postcard that was an image of that island, Naxos or whatever it's called, right? Mm-hmm. But, like, in that moment, the picture changes from the island to the picture of his house. And so that's kind of like the postcard's representation of how the reflection becomes the view, because now the postcard, the place that, like, you're seeing is kind of like, this is where you were, is no longer the island where the bad shit happened. It's the house that he lived in as the second Eric Sanderson. So, like, it gets really, really confusing, and I don't think that there's a clear answer. But my understanding is, like, he made a conscious choice when the boat became physically real and they were actually on physical water to live this kind of reflection life as opposed to living the hard life where life is just kind of pain and suffering.
Well, ultimately he becomes the conceptual Eric Sanderson.
That's pretty much exactly it.
I mean, he lives in the world of the luxophages and the glooms and the conceptual fish as Eric Sanderson, basically.
With Cleo, who is like the reflection representation with Scout, I'm sorry, which is the representation reflectively of Cleo, which, like, the connections there are just so fucking obvious, but.
And so much of that too lends itself to the whole story being bullshit and him being crazy too. Because although that's the case, but she has, like, the tattoo, but she's clearly not. She's too young to be
Cleo,
right? But she's got the tattoo. She knows he used to smoke, and that's kind of covered up by we know things because we're the Unspace committee, right?
Yeah.
But her becoming Cleo kind of just erases Scout altogether, unless Scout died and he recreates her in his conceptual world too. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because then you're just and saying that, Livius isn't around anymore, so you just take someone else and make them Livius in your own little world, which is unfair to that person. I mean, obviously it's an upgrade, but you get what I'm saying? It's almost like you erase a person, unless he's just crazy the whole fucking time and none of this is real.
So to counter that, I think that the order of events at the end of the book is very important. So, like, we go through the story of, like, defeating the shark and going with Scout to live on the island or whatever, as kind of his way of just kind of accepting this is the life I want, and finally kind of giving himself, happiness. Then we get the postcard. No, I'm sorry. Then we see the newspaper article that says the body of Eric Sanderson was found, and his doctor was doing, thought he had some mental problems, and referring back to the death of Cleo. So all that stuff is real. And then the postcard happens. So after the newspaper article that says Eric Sanderson is dead, and you're like, oh, shit, this was all in his head, and he was a crazy person. Then you get the postcard afterwards that says, hey, I'm alive and I'm never coming back. And so I think that the chronology of when they were presented in the book basically is your way of saying this story was this insane story that you believed because you believed in the character. That little newspaper clipping brought it all into question and acknowledged, hey, this could just have been in that dude's head. But the postcard brings you back to, oh shit, this could have actually been something that really happened.
Right. And I'm sure that it's again, and Stephen Hall knows, fuck that guy if he says he doesn't. He knows. He knows the answer to this because he had to think about it and and again give it twisty endings and stuff. There was one other point I wanted to talk about. Oh, you go ahead and talk about your discovery, Mister. I love the fucking Jaws movies because I have an issue with that, slight issue with that too.
So anybody who's read the book will 100% agree to me, and I think that Stephen Hall has even acknowledged this, or at least it's not something that's like hidden or denied or anything. That the fourth part of the book, basically from the part where they decide they're gonna use a boat as their vessel to take on the shark. This whole part of the book is basically like a scene-by-scene reimagining of the third act of the movie Jaws. But instead of taking on an actual real shark, they're taking on this conceptual shark. But like beat for fucking beat. Like you name something that happened in the book and I can completely tie it into something that happened in the movie.
Which makes more sense, and I think it's acknowledged a little bit in the story itself, because Fedoris actually says, hey, anybody who knows anything about hunting sharks knows this is the boat, and where else would you fucking know that from, right?
Right.
I mean, that's
and yeah, he says, like, this is like the commonly held concept of what a shark hunting boat is. Right, exactly.
Yeah, and there's only one example of that in all of history, and that's the Jaws movie. I mean, that's so I think that's acknowledged fairly in the book. I that buys itself a little bit of I don't want to say credence based on the fact I was going to say that part just went on a little too long for me. If I have one complaint about this book is that whole conceptual shark hunt just went on for a little bit longer than it should have.
Sure, but it's very intentional. Like this is the way he wanted the book to end was. I think with that kind of mix of reality and imagination that is perfectly represented by using the third act of Jaws as like the framework for the showdown with like the big bad shark.
The other issue is just imagine. So we know that this has happened to Eric, and I guess we have to take the Dr. Randall at her word, right? Like 8 or 9 times this has happened to him now.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you just imagine what kind of structure had to be in place? Because that means that each of the previous Eric Sandersons also received, now in some cases, maybe just 1 or 2 packages, because she said sometimes it's a week.
Right. And sometimes it's like, yeah.
So there has to be a structure there. So my question to you is, who's the old man at the door that tells him his package is getting wet? Or is he? I mean, is he even? is there even anything, or is it just like the fucking UPS guy?
Because that's the light bulb fragment. That's the catalyst for the entire book. Is the old man's banging on the door, says, "Hey, your package is getting wet," and that's why he opens it up and discovers the light bulb fragment, which is the kind of first translation of what actually like happened in his previous life. So that's his first taste of the fact that like, oh hey, shit. Cleo died and all that stuff. Good question. I'm just going to go ahead and assume it's the same old man that's from the movie Home Alone that makes everybody cry.
That's I've not seen it, so okay.
Oh, All right. I'm not even gonna. I mean, it's been so many years of you just having no clue about movies that I can't even get upset about it anymore. But good question. I did not have an answer prepared for that. I think I had so much information prepared for this. We haven't talked about Mycroft Ward yet. Do you want to talk about Mycroft at all?
No, I do. I think that I don't know how to like. I don't think it's. No, I don't think it's fair what I'm doing to the book and maybe what other people have done to the book, because I don't think that Stephen Hall wrote a book under the belief that it would be under such scrutiny.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Like, I don't think anybody writes a book and says someone may read this 3 fucking times and figure out that it's kind of really impossible that Eric Sanderson, the first Eric Sanderson, had set up 10 different times or 30 different times, because he doesn't know when the end is, of sending the light bulb fragment tape. And
right.
Like, or does somebody go and collect it all up once Sanderson loses his fucking mind? You know what I mean? Like, there's some, and I don't want to say plot holes, but I don't think it's fair to the author almost to analyze line by line the likelihood of some of these things. I'm not trying to shortchange the story at all. You know, I love it dearly and equally with every reading, but yeah, sometimes I think that maybe we overanalyze.
You're definitely overanalyzing. That's fair though, and like there are certain things where it's like, if you think too long about it, I think he does a good job of misdirecting you to think deeply about the things that are within his control.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Let's talk about Mycroft Ward.
If I ever had like a man crush on a book character, it's fucking Mycroft Ward, and I don't even know why, because he's the bad guy. And like he's like the centuries old man version of this fucking shark. How much do you want to talk about him, or do you want me to kind of explain Mycroft Ward?
I'm gonna go with, I don't think that Mycroft Ward, and I think it says in the book that he wasn't a bad guy, but that it's kind of spawned into this crazy, snowball kind of effect.
Yeah.
Based on what it was. I don't think he started out as a bad dude. And I think that if we see him in the next book, I think we're going to see a guy who's a pretty cool guy, really smart.
That's a good point. Cause really, like, if you think about the monstrosity that Mycroft Ward is presented as in the book, it's the accumulation of just bad coding. Like, if you want to put it in really simple terms, like, the idea of Mycroft Ward, fucking love this story. And it's like, here's the thing about, he's probably the most compelling of all the characters in the book, including a fucking conceptual shark. I think that he is the most interesting character beyond, like, far beyond all the other characters. He maybe takes up, including, like, mentions of him and, like, the actual story of him, 6-7 pages out of like the 430 pages in the book. So he's almost never mentioned, but I can't stop thinking about this character. And it's because his backstory, his origin story is so interesting. So, the original Mycroft Ward existed in the late 1800s. And while at war, I can't remember which war, apologies. He came back from war. And I think it's so interesting because, like, in a casual conversation, someone said something about death, or like maybe he came down with something. I don't really exactly remember. He just decided, I'm not going to die.
This is what happened. He was like, holy shit, these wars are dangerous. I could be killed. I don't want that to happen. So he like kind of figures out a way to make it not happen. So which is super interesting.
Yeah, he creates this psychological process that basically allows him to imprint his habits and his mannerisms and his personality and his memories into another person. So there's no weird science, there's no magic involved. He's basically training someone else to be him. And it works. And it's really cool. And so, like, he has this copy of himself. His original body dies, and now he's living in this new body who's younger. But then another war happens, and he goes to war. And he's like, oh shit, I could die, and there's only one of me. And so he refines his process to the point where he kind of creates a way that his collective self can exist in parts in two different people. And so he goes through the process and it's successful, but now these two people have to kind of on a regular basis connect and like kind of download their experiences into each other. But now if one dies, he's still got the other one and he can kind of repeat the process. But because at some point he becomes so obsessed with the idea of protecting his existence, the process overemphasizes the idea of having his personality in multiple people. It goes out of control, and he just keeps creating more and more and more instances of himself spread out over more people. And then with the advent of technology and stuff, it becomes easier and easier to kind of like, make the process more efficient. That he ends up in like a dozen bodies, and then like 3 dozen bodies, and then 100 bodies, and so his personality is spread out among multiple people. And then when the internet shows up, man, now he's like basically an online database of personalities and experience. And the fucking terrifying thing about this guy is, as he continues to like assimilate these people, the perspective I never would have thought of, but it's probably the scariest thing, is like when he was in like 12 bodies, they basically said like he's living, basically 2 weeks every day of the week.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, that is fucking horrifying.
Yeah, of how interesting it was that he could just use kind of hypnosis and basically a long written test of sorts to imprint himself on somebody. Yeah. The fact that he was gaining knowledge at double the rate and quadruple the rate and whatever the mathematical equation is for 100 times the rate.
Yep.
Is really what's fascinating. He reminds me of, and I get the feeling we talked about this on the podcast previously, Ray Kurzweil. Kurzweil? I don't know how you say his name. Are you familiar?
I don't think so.
So Ray Kurzweil is an inventor and a futurist.
Okay.
He's the guy who very accurately predicts and patents stuff way ahead of its own development.
So he's like Nostradamus of patent trolls?
Yeah, pretty much. But what he does is he somehow uses an algorithm because of how technology begets more technology.
Yeah.
He's able to predict when things will be available and basically create patents for them based on the time frame when they're available. That makes sense.
That's awesome.
He's most known for being a weirdo. He's also, and I don't have any information in front of me or whatever, but he's actually cured an incurable disease using nothing but vitamins and supplements. And if you ever get a chance to see a documentary on this guy, Rob, he eats as much as you do in a day of food. That's what he takes in vitamins. It's like bags and bags
Jesus.
of vitamins. But he has cured an incurable disease that he had, and his whole goal is to keep himself healthy for long enough to upload his intelligence to a computer. Does that sound at all kind of familiar?
Kind of sounds familiar, yeah.
Yeah, and he's trying to do this stuff because he's there's some weird stuff, like he's trying to upload his stuff, and he's trying to remember his dad. I mean, there's a whole, it's fascinating, and he comes off as a little nuts until you understand that this guy's that frighteningly smart.
Right.
That if somebody does it, it's going to be him. I think he's best known for creating basically the first solid like communication device for deaf people, or maybe it's mute people, which was basically like a text to speech.
Yeah.
Function.
Oh, so he's got to be rich too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. Well, you to live like him, you have to be. But yeah, that's who this guy, or that's who Mycroft Ward reminds me of a little bit, because this is that guy who's going to be the first guy to upload his intelligence and then figure out a way to make himself into some online database that.
Now, it actually, as Livius, I've done multiple readings of this book, and it wasn't until this one that I realized the real kind of frightening thing about the Mycroft Ward character. And there's a subtlety which I didn't catch until this time, but it's because I was paying really close attention. There was a part where you're talking about the history of how he became what he is today, where when he successfully takes his personality and puts it into 2 people, there's this real offhanded comment where they basically say, and he never reported this marvel to the scientific community, or something like that.
Yep.
And that's when you realize that like it doesn't matter to him to better humanity or to progress science or anything like that. He only the singular care in his entire life is to continue living.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the chilling part of that character is like whatever kind of noble awesomeness of this original person who had this kind of quirky idea to copy himself into someone else. The thing that was lost was his humanity. And I thought that was really cool.
He's fascinating in that the thing that we didn't mention is he doesn't actually make an appearance in the story.
Right. He's never in the book. He's
just talked
to.
About.
Yeah. Oh, God. It's just so good. This is by far, going to be one of the longer reviews we have, and definitely the longest spoiler discussion. But, man, that Mycroft Ward character. And nothing ever good comes out of it. He's just like... He's like this perfect thing that is an element of a book, and it's just like, wow. Yeah. It's really cool.
My thought is that his Mycroft Ward was not destroyed.
Mm.
And that some of the theories behind some of the things Stephen Hall has said about the future book is that it takes place in 1854 and 2054.
Yep.
1854, as people have mentioned, I remember on the Stephen Hall website, is perfect for a young Mycroft Ward to appear as a character, and 2054 would be a great time for it to come to some kind of head, maybe where the Terminator takes him out or something along those lines. But give this guy a 2,000-year lifespan. Would be interesting. Now, again, we don't know exactly.
I'm going to challenge your math on the distance between 1854 and 2054.
200 years. Yeah. You're correct. Yeah, sorry. But you know what I mean? So it would be interesting. Yeah. And of course, I'm not the first person to it's not an original thought in any way, shape, or form. But so I'm thinking if that's the case, if he is a character, there's no good reason why his character is destroyed.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it could be that the Mycroft Ward connection definitely destroyed the shark, but wasn't strong enough to actually destroy Mycroft Ward. That's a good point. Never thought about that. It would be great if in this follow-up book Mycroft Ward existed, but exploring a facet of the character that we never seen before. So it forces us to kind of shift our perspective on that character. I'd really appreciate that.
Maybe some interesting thoughts that could happen. What if early on one of the Mycroft Wards broke off?
Like a rogue ward?
Yeah, like from the sinking process, but the guy's smart enough and has collected enough information that maybe his Ray Kurzweil and he just takes a shit ton of vitamins and winds up living to be 200 years old to destroy the entity that he created or something along those lines.
Well, that's the beauty of the Scout character in general. Like anybody who's read the book will understand this. Is like Scout underwent the online standardizing process to become kind of like an extension of the Mycroft Ward personality. Until her sister Polly unplugged the fucking internet, which interrupted the process. So there was basically part of Mycroft Ward downloaded into Scout's brain, but it interrupted the process. So she lost part of herself and gained part of Ward, and she's kind of in this holding pattern where if anybody ever the right thing happened and she was discovered, they could activate that part of her brain and kind of wardify her, I guess is the way to say it. And her, that part of Ward in her brain mirrors the cancer that Cleo had in her brain. So it's the kind of reflection of the cancer. The cancer in Scout's brain was Mycroft Ward. But that sets the fucking table perfectly for exactly what you were saying. There has to be times where the process didn't work properly. Or something like that. Which would just open the door for so many. And I think if there's one thing that Stephen Hall accomplished with this book is planting such a rich garden of ideas in our heads that he never had to explore on his own because our mind made them so much greater than maybe he could have even written them.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's actually amazing. Back to that whole thing about her sister too. What a great throwaway that is. There was no heroic rescue at the last minute. It's someone just unplugged the internet for...
It is the minutia of life saved her from being enslaved to some sort of weird online hive mind. And that's reality. That's what would happen. And I think that's one of the great things about how this story is told is no one ever sees how real life gets in the way of extraordinary things.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up spoiler talk?
I didn't know I could even talk this much about this book. So, no.
All right, we're going to take it back to our regular booked episode and do a quick recap and throw some stars at this, which seems kind of silly at this point anyway to give this a rating. But thank you again for being a Patreon contributor. We are going to try to do these more often. I think we're already off to a great start this year with 2 of these. So keep the money coming, and we'll keep the spoiler talk going.